Hi, it's Steve. In this video, we'd like to show you how to change the dual element infinite heat switch on your range. It's a really easy repair. Let me show you how we do it. Now, before we begin this repair, the first thing we'll need to do is pull the range forward and also disconnect the power. You can simply unplug it or locate the electrical panel, turn off the appropriate breaker, or remove the appropriate fuses. Once we've done that, we can start the repair. Now that we've disconnected the power, our next step will be to remove the control knob itself and just set that aside. That gives us access to the retaining screws that secure that infinite heat switch to the console. Then we'll go to the back of the range and we'll remove the back panel. Now that we have access to the back of the range, with this particular series of ranges, we're going to remove the top 2 screws of the main back panel, and then we'll remove the 4 screws for the top access panel. These are number 2 Phillips head screws. The screws for the main panel have a larger head on them than the 4 on the top, so make sure you keep those separate. Now we'll just lift that access panel out of the way. We can then locate that switch, located on the left-hand side as we face the range from the rear. Now we'll go ahead and remove those 2 screws that we exposed behind the knob, and then we can pull that control out and remove the individual wires. Now, depending on your model, you may find that the replacement switch looks a lot different than the original. A lot of the original ones only had 5 terminals on them, and the replacement one will have 7. So it's important to make sure that we put the wires in the proper position. They are all labeled. There'll be an L1 and an L2 terminal. There'll also be an H1 and an H2 terminal. These are marked on the original control as well. And there's also a P terminal that is designated for the pilot light. On some models, you may find that if you attach those wires directly to the new switch, that the pilot light will be on all the time. So there's an easy test for that, and we'll explain that once we have the control installed. So take note of the location of all of these wires, and you can remove them from the control all at once, or if you prefer, you can simply pull one set of wires off at a time. Note the designation on the original control, and then attach it to the new control to the corresponding terminal. Make sure they fit nice and snug. If not, take a pair of needle nose pliers and crimp those just a bit. When removing those wires, you should always grasp them by the terminal itself and not the wire. So if you find some that are on there tight, simply use a pair of needle nose pliers to remove them. Now we've connected all of the wires with the exception of the one for the indicator lamp or pilot light. Now, to test this switch to ensure that it is wired correctly, once we have it mounted into the control panel, we're going to reconnect power to the range. We've left off the wire from the terminal marked P on that new control. We're going to turn the new control on, as well as an adjacent control to the on position. And then using a voltmeter, we're going to check for power between the L1 terminal on the new control and the P terminal on the second control that you turned on. If you measure 220 or 240 volts, that would indicate that we need to reverse 2 wires on that new control. We would swap the L1 wires with the L2 wires, simply reverse those. We can then reconnect that P terminal to the new control, and it should work perfectly. If you're not comfortable in working with a voltmeter, the other method that you can use is to simply wire that control as described, including attaching the wire to the P terminal. If you find that the indicator light is on all of the time, even without a control being turned on, you would then disconnect the power and reverse those L1 and L2 wires on that new switch. We'll then attach that wire to the P terminal on the bottom of that control, line it up in the opening. We'll reinstall those 2 mounting screws from the front. Now, when reinstalling the back panel, we want to make sure that the flange on the bottom of that upper access panel goes underneath all of the wiring. We also need to tuck in the top edge. And you'll find that the wire harness that goes down to the back of the range will need to fit into this little notch. Now, once the upper access panel is in place, you can press the main rear panel into position and then secure it with the screws. We'll now go to the front of the range. We'll ensure that our 2 mounting screws for that infinite heat switch are secure. Reinstall the knob. We can then push the range back into place, reconnect the power, and your repair is complete.